Now, the USA is one of the big ones. Now, the USA went from 1,551,000 children enrolled in preschool daycare in 1980 to 5,015,000 in 2018. Massive wide-scale problem there. So it went from 4.2 million enrolled in daycare at any time, full-time or part-time, to a peak of 9.16 in 2011, and it's currently now at 7.87 in 2021. So it's floating around 7 million middle of the pandemic, and Biden, as we'll see, is only trying to get that up. This is probably because of the proportion of white American families having children dropping among liberals and increasing among conservatives who wouldn't enroll them in daycare. That's the reason for the dip, but still, there are plenty of right-wing people who feel that they are pressured into putting their kids in these institutions just by money worries, and that's only getting worse with inflation. Over 80% of preschool-age children experience non-parental childcare, and a study also found that early informal childcare, earlier commencement age, or higher intensity represent a risk for childhood obesity. So this is due to malnutrition or overfeeding by a relative in informal childcare, or, as we'll see later, high cortisol levels from early age childcare that persist throughout adolescence, so that can lead them to comfort eat. So, again, not excellent. National surveys like the 2019 Early Childhood Program Participation Survey and the 2012 National Survey of Early Child Care and Education provide rich data on the characteristics that are important for parents searching for childcare. In this article, according to two studies, almost half of the parents with a child under the age of 6 searched for care in the past 2 weeks since this was published, and 2/3 of this group had enrolled their child in a new program. There's good news. Our annual survey results show that between 2018 and 2019, 53% of states reported a decline in the number of childcare centres. More alarmingly, they say, 79% of states reported a decline in family childcare providers. When we compare 2018 data to 2020 data, the picture is grimmer. In total, 24 of the 39 states which completed both surveys reported a loss in the number of centres and centre-based slots. That's 64%. So hopefully that's people pulling their kids out, but we aren't sure of the actual reasons. We can only speculate. And in observations of over 600 non-maternal childcare settings of all kinds, this is grandparents, in-home care, childcare homes and centres, in 9 states, they found that only 11% of the settings were rated excellent. So most of them are not up to staff, but the number is only going up. Now, a particularly dark stat that I've compiled from a few sources, and I can only find stats from 2018, are on the rates of physical abuse in care. And so there were 5,321 cases of child abuse in daycares reported by 39 states across 2,237 daycare providers in 2017. 22% of those were sexual abuse. And I think we can write off the patriarchy considering 92% of daycare providers are female. So this is very much an effect of the devouring mother, not to get Freudian, but not excellent. There was a examination by Texas family law firms that was published in the Texas Tribune, and they found that in Texas alone, more than 450 children were sexually abused and 88 others died of abuse and neglect in Texas daycare facilities. Again, red state, blue cities, I know. Now, the worry is, of course, that the Biden administration have signed an executive order to make childcare even cheaper. So the New York Times spoke to Susan Rice, and she said that his executive order, because that's how he governs, of course, would direct some agencies to lower co-pays for services. Other provisions will seek to make Medicare and Medicaid dollars go further. Still others will examine new ways to improve childcare for veterans and Native American tribes. She said the order marshals the full resources of the federal government to improve access to high-quality, affordable care. But the order does not deliver on the goal that Mr. Biden himself identified at the beginning of his presidency when he proposed $225 billion to fully cover childcare for low-income Americans and an additional $200 billion for universal preschool. These proposals failed to win support in Congress. The Republicans weren't keen. So Biden's obviously just governing by fear anyway. But you can see the intention to incrementally escalate to the point of where your kid are raised from cradle to grave, as Barack Obama even once said, by the state. And so these people do not have your best interests at heart. And he's said as much, and so has most of his employees, because the education secretary said that parents are not the primary stakeholder in children's education. Who is? Bit worrying.
Fairly quick answers here because I want to get to Secretary Becerra. Do you think parents should be in charge of their child's education as the primary stakeholder?
I believe parents are important stakeholders, but I also believe educators have a role in determining educational programming.
And I think that's going to be a little out of focus. What I think you're going to find across all elements of education, since they pay the bills, they raise the kids, they probably need to be the primary spokespeople for their own kids' good education.
It's just an obvious attempt to expand state power, isn't it?
Yeah, and they're also using the word stakeholder, which is the WEF buzzword of saying our appointed experts know more than you and have more of a preferential interest in how the society is going to be engineered than you do in your own kids.
I mean, it was a common word before Klaus Schwab, so we can't necessarily...
Yeah, but it's been co-opted in recent years, definitely, by the exact kind of people that sign on to the Sustainable Development Goals, which say that education is a human right, and therefore they're going to encompass all of state policy to enroll your kid in a daycare or educational institution where they're being indoctrinated. Joe Biden has also said that your kids do belong to the teachers. So at the Teachers of the Year award, which we'll play clips of course, Biden said, they're all our children. They're not someone else's children. They're like yours when they're in the classroom. And then he recently also said there's no such thing as someone else's child.
Rebecca put a teacher's creed into words when she said, there's no such thing as someone else's child. No such thing as someone else's child. Our nation's children are all our children.
Right.
Sniffer in chief, again.
Well, that's just an obvious communistic phrase.
They're all my children. I'm the president.
Yeah, let me smell you. Come on, man. There was also a article.
Times about our children. But it's true. They're all our children. And the reason you're the Teachers of the Year is because you recognize that. They're not somebody else's children. They're like yours when they're in the classroom.
There was also a article in the New York Magazine, which betrays the thinking about this, called Children Are Not Property. I'm just going to read a few extracts, because what would you think would be the argument for children are not property? That they have independent autonomous personhood that we shouldn't encroach on?
Well, the only argument I've heard is the ridiculous sort of, I don't know whether it's a sort of Randian, but it's a sort of typically libertarian argument that I don't agree with, despite being a libertarian, that children are somehow able to run away from their... I think Rothbard said it at one point, where he was saying children have a right to run away from their parents if their parents aren't very good, which is a bit... I mean, you can understand why, avoid abusive parents, but it seems a bit far. Like, saying that children have the ability to make decisions for themselves is a bit far, in my opinion.
As we've already said, we have to strike a balance with the ability for a third party to step in when there is clear abuse going on in the household. And I like the framing of parental responsibility as, because your kid couldn't choose you, you have to act in such a way that if they could choose their parents, they would have chosen you. That's how you've got to act towards them.
Fair standard, yeah.
The problem is that's not what this person's going for. So she's written here, authoritarianism is gospel to modern conservatives. Nowhere is clearer than in their assaults on children. The parental rights movement is not new, but it is enjoying a resurgence. Adherents say they're protecting children from harm. Children aren't private property, but a public responsibility. To expand our democratic project to children is to grant them the security that the right seeks to deny them. Education, healthcare, shelter, food. A better America begins with the child. And those rights, much like the UN 21 AIDS principles that we covered, include genital mutilation. And she says, the denial of gender-affirming care is another act of violence. Far-right extremists invent tales of wanton surgeries on minors and irreversible hormonal treatments. I mean, none of those are invented. They're documented. No. We have the cases. I've spoken to people that have had this done. But of course, as we're seeing with Washington and California becoming sanctuary states for runaway kids seeking gender-affirming genital lobotomies, their opinion is that unless you prescribe to the state's new religions of climate scaremongering and antinatalism, then you are abusive. So that's the kind of institutions they want to put your kids in with that ideology. Get them out. That's my only advice there.
I really hate how they refer to anything that they can't get that they want as an act of violence. Like, how can being denied a surgery be an act of violence?
Because it comes right the way back to the conceptualization that Mary said that I opened with, and that is their version of liberalism has Rousseauian presuppositions, that we existed in a state of nature, that we were plucked out and thrown into civilization where we were forced to live together and depend on one another and also get envious of each other because of private property and artificial scarcity. And instead what we should have is an authoritarian overseeing state that abundantly provides and have absolutely no responsibilities to one another. So They want to be dependent children. That is actually what they're positing. Their political system is, I want to be a dependent child. What they want, to frame it in a way that some people may not like, but is to re-enter a Garden of Eden that never existed, while also having all the knowledge that allows them to be as gods. And it's just an insane pipe dream, but that's what we're currently pursuing. So that's the conceptualization of rights. They genuinely believe that they were in a state of abundance they've been robbed from. So...
Yeah, there's no such thing as a state of abundance in the state of nature.
There's no broadband in the wilderness, but somehow you've conceived of it as a right. Okay.
To watch the full video, please become a premium member at lotuseaters.com.